Hey everyone, welcome to On Tap. I'm Chris, and I'm not an expert, just a guy who enjoys some good beer. Now in this episode, I'm going to be ranking all of the beers produced by Grupo Modelo, i.e. the largest beer producer in all of Mexico. This company manufactures some of the most well-known beer brands on planet Earth, specifically Corona and all of the Corona varieties, as well as Modelo and all of the Modelo varieties. I'm going to be pitting them against one another to see which one reigns supreme. Also, just to make it very clear, I'm not going to be ranking light beer in this episode, so these are only proper beers. But what I will be doing is pulling in a couple of the Chelada style beers, or Michelada style beers in one case, from the older Modelo brewery episode. If you want to check that one out, link down below, card over here. And then I'm going to be seeing, out of all of these beers, we got 9 in total, which one is best. So let's get to the episode. So let's get to tasting. I'm going to be pulling these out blind. I don't want to know what order they come in. It's just whatever my hand gets to first. And we have the classic Corona Extra. Made famous around the world in innumerable beer commercials. You may have seen some of them. Beaches, people sitting on beaches, and, well, white sandy beaches in general, palm trees, tropicalness, tend to factor pretty prominently into any good Corona commercial. Yep, very pale, looks like a lager. So, I don't know about you, I'm always fine with just a good Corona. I know out there are people who really, they hate Corona, they really don't like it, they think it's just an absolutely trash beer. And there are some beers that I think that's very, very fair to say, but I don't know what it is. I've never had an issue with Corona. I've always found it to be a perfectly nice, very easy to drink, just quintessential Mexican beer where it's reasonably mild. You got a little bit of that bright, sort of almost citrusy, but not quite there, summery flavor. It's not offensive. It's got a very light body, but not in like a thin way. I would say though, classic hot weather beer. I don't want to drink Corona when it's cold and when it's like, dark and snowy outside. This is a true sort of summer beer, but I don't know, something about it. It's just a classic, well-known beer all around the world, and for good reason. Corona works for me. So next we have Estrella Jalisco. So this is a beer you may have seen if you live in certain parts of the US and certainly in Mexico, but for viewers in Europe, East Asia, I don't know about other parts of Latin America actually. If anyone's tuning in from Brazil or Peru or Argentina, let me know if you've seen this beer before. But Estrella Jalisco, the star of Jalisco being a state in Mexico. It's I'm working on my Mexican geography actually these days, and I understand Jalisco is sort of to the west of Mexico City, Ciudad de Mexico. Looks almost identical to the Corona, just a little bit more of a fluffy head. Doesn't smell like anything. Let's see how it tastes. So that's okay as well. The thing about this, I think, compared to the Corona is this has more of a typical beer feeling to it, a body to it, in the sense of like what I think of as a lager, where it's just kind of smooth, it's reasonably calming. I wouldn't say it's exceptionally malty or anything. There's not a ton in the way of flavor, but it's just got a slight bit of fullness to it compared to the Corona Extra. What it's lacking, however, is that really, really characteristic sort of almost citrusy but not quite Mexican brightness. Comes across as a not very flavorful but acceptably bodied lager where there's maybe just the smallest amount of that citrusy brightness. Not terrible, but not particularly exceptional, just a very kind of mediocre lager. Next we have Modelo Especial. This is now, as of recording this video, so mid 2023, should we say. This is, as of mid 2023, the best-selling beer in all of the United States of America. It has now knocked Bud Light off the list. That is a topic I am not going to get into on this channel, either way, in either direction. So if you're looking for hot takes, this is not the channel for you. Please go somewhere else. I mean, obviously keep watching this video to see more beer tasting. But anyway, this is now, as of mid-2023, the best-selling beer in all of the United States. And it looks very, very similar to the Corona Extra, maybe just a tad bit more golden, but not by much. And it smells like basically nothing. So let's see how it tastes. Well, I will say that it does taste reasonably clean. So it's quite clean and refreshing, but beyond that, there's very little in the way of flavor. So obviously better than a light beer, nothing like that. It doesn't taste watery, and it does have a nice, just kind of cleanly feel to it in my palate, but there's really not much in the way of flavor beyond that. It's just sort of a very kind of non-offensive beer that you can sip on. Like the Estais Jalisco and the Corona, you do still have just an ever so slightly hint of that Mexican brightness, but it is like the Estais Jalisco. It's really, really, really muted. It's almost not even there. So, beer number 4, we have Pacifico CL. This is another sort of extremely popular beer that you will, at least depending on where you live, see in lots and lots and lots of sort of package stores, grocery stores, beer stores. And yeah, Pacifico is manufactured by Grupo Modelo. So it is, I would argue, probably the third most well-known beer brand manufactured by this company after arguably Modelo, Corona. Those are the top two for sure. But yeah, Pacifico would be sort of number 3. So let's see how it stacks up against what we got on the table so far. These all basically look the same. They're very, very pale, very clear lagers also. None of them are really hazy, and then sort of, thin heads. Let's take a taste. I quite like that actually. Similar to the Corona, this has a nice summery brightness to it. A very similar note actually to the Corona Extra. I mean, it's acceptably bodied. It's not thin or anything like that. It doesn't taste like a light beer. Certainly not a winter drink. Very much a summer drink. But I think it's got a nice blend of the acceptable sort of light body of a lager with a little bit of that summery kind of almost pseudo citrusy brightness, which makes for a very pleasant drinking experience. The Corona goes maybe a little bit more on the citrusy kind of almost lime flavor. This is a little bit more balanced, but I certainly think it's nicer than the Estais Jalisco. I'm going to put these two together to see kind of how they stack up. And I think all of the elements are just balanced and brought out a little bit more compared to something like a Modelo. Corona Familiar. So the other Corona beer to put on the table, and again, just so we're clear, I'm not including light beers in this competition, so we will not see Corona Light or Corona Premier, which was sort of the next iteration of light beer that came out. We're just doing like proper beers, so that means Corona Extra and Corona Familiar. And I mean, this basically tastes like nothing. I know I've reviewed Corona and Corona Familiar in one of the first episodes that we ever did on this channel. What does Corona taste like, or Corona? Should we have it with lime or no lime? And I remember ranking these two beers, and my assessment is identical to what it was back then, which is Corona Familiar tastes like the tired, sad, depressed cousin of Corona Extra. If you took Corona Extra and you got that kind of bright lime flavor in it, and you just took all of the life out of it, and you kept sort of the remaining shell of what was sort of once a Corona, that's basically what Corona Familiar tastes like. Just absolutely mediocre, not at all something to write home about. I think it's time to move on. This is a Chelada, or a Chelada, the classic Chelada made by Modelo, which if you didn't see the Modelo brewery episode, basically a Chelada is a type of beer preparation or cerveza preparada, a prepared beer in Mexico, or cerveza preparada in Spanish, meaning prepared beer, or basically a beer cocktail. What you do is you mix beer with often a combination of lime or lime juice, as well as, in the case of the Chelada, tomato juice. So it's sort of like a beer, it's like a beer Bloody Mary, essentially. And for those of you who have had Bloody Marys, they're very common at brunch, right? Vodka mixed with tomato juice. You got a random celery stick stuck in there. I don't know why the celery stick is there. If anyone knows, please explain to me. I never kind of got it. But anyway, that is what a Chelada is. And also, my videographer informed me that I have been mispronouncing Chelada in the previous episode, so apologies, Spanish speakers, for me referring to it as a Chelada. It is not a Chelada, it is a Chelada, which is also doubly embarrassing given the fact that I did study Spanish for some time in school. Anyway, that notwithstanding, let's see how this compares to all the others. Though, of course, this is a tomato beer combination, so it's going to be a little different than your garden variety lager. Now, this is the first beer that's actually reasonably hazy, and it's got, decent head. Not super frothy, but decent. It's almost like an auburn color. It looks sort of vaguely like an amber ale. I can smell the spicy tomato flavor. I don't know about you, but I think this is just a fun beverage. It's just fun. How often do you mix beer with tomato juice and actually come up with a very pleasant experience? Compared to the other ones that are more just, generic, this has a unique character to it, right? It is the beer version of a Bloody Mary, and I think Modelo, they've done a good job of putting it together. It doesn't just feel like tomato flavor infused into weak beer. It's a decent blend. All right, so let's keep going. Modelo Negro. So, Black Modelo. This is a slightly higher ABV than some of the other beers we've been trying. A lot of the beers we've been trying actually are pretty low in terms of ABV. They're like, 4.4, 4.5, which is still in the range of kind of a typical lager. This is like 5.5, so it's still very average by the standards of many beers produced around the world, but compared to what we have on the table, this would be definitely on the higher end. So, yeah, it's got very much an amber color, so I can smell a little tiny bit of caramel sweetness. Take a taste. That's fine. It's fine. I think it's a little bit nicer, a little bit more interesting than the classic Modelo Especial, but the thing about this is it tastes a little thin, and especially for a beer that, I don't know, I've always said this, I feel like beers that are a little darker, they should just be a little thicker, a little heavier, a little bit more full in their body. This one really doesn't have that. It has a body not too dissimilar, honestly, from the Modelo Especial. So, we're not done yet. Let's keep going. We have the second Chelada beer, which I personally quite enjoyed, Naranja Picosa, so spicy orange, along with the classic Michelada. There were others that we reviewed in the Modelo Brewery taste test specifically, but these were the two real winners that I felt it was only fair to bring them into the final Grupo Modelo taste test. We've got some returning beers from that previous episode, but I want to see. Really, what I wanted to see in this episode is, how does Modelo compare to Corona? And thus far, I would say the answer is, depends on which one you pick. Since the variance for Corona is very wide, the variance for the Modelo brand is much more narrow. All right, that was a little bit larger of a pour than I was expecting. This one has sort of a cloudy, kind of golden-ish color. Almost no head at all, but there's virtually no head on this at all. Look, call me crazy, and I get, if you want to call me crazy in the comments, you have every right to do that. I just have to give this point for the fact that I feel like I'm drinking orange juice and beer mixed together, but not in a gross way. I get that sounds like a terrible combination, but it works. I don't know how it works. It shouldn't work. It should taste terrible. But it works. This works for me. All right, last beer. Let's get to it. We have Victoria, or Victoria. It's same word, it's just, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Not a brand that, at least from what I've seen in the States, is very easy to get a hold of. My guess is, any viewers from Mexico tuning in, please let me know. My guess is Victoria you could probably find very easily in Mexico. US, it might be more of a specialty store kind of thing. Anyway, let's see. Oh, it is actually, was not expecting this. It's a little bit darker. This is, now again, this is almost completely see-through, but it is a sort of amber orange color. And there's not much going on there. I mean, that's like down here. Yeah, not the best note to end on, but it is what it is. Yeah, this doesn't have a tremendous amount of flavor to it. I would put it in a very similar category to the Corona Familiar. This is a beer that, other than the fact that it doesn't have the body of a light beer, there's almost no flavor to this beer. Just the absolute slightest, smallest, weakest, whatever you want to call it, hint of that Mexican brightness that any of these other beers further up the table do a much better job of. There's not much going on here, and actually in it, I'm not even put this behind the Corona Familiar. Now that I'm taking that second taste, actually, it has a very, 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 very small amount of that not great, slightly sour flavor. So anyway, yes, I will see you after these messages. I'm kidding, there are no messages, just the title slide that says assessment. I will see you after the assessment slide and then get into kind of my final thoughts on these beers and how they all stack up against each other. After reviewing all the beers, I have my final assessment. In last place, we have Victoria, or Victoria. This beer is, while not exactly a light beer, riding awfully close to that line. It has that not exceptionally great, almost vaguely sour aftertaste to it, not as much as something like the Corona Light, which we will not talk about in this episode at least, but which is not far off from some not ideal light beers. This is really scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of a beer that if someone said, oh, it's available, would you like it? I'd say like, I don't know. You'd really have to sell me on this. This would definitely need a lime wedge down the neck, which we didn't have time to do for this episode, but yeah, just a side note, for a lot of these beers, a lot of these Mexican beers, you really do want to have this with a lime wedge. And the long necks of the bottle really do allow for you to kind of just, shoot it down. And it's just a fun thing to do, and it adds a little bit of flavor. Something like the Victoria would really benefit from a lime wedge. So the Corona Familiar, as I've said, is like the tired, sad, depressed, less fun cousin of the Corona Extra. It has the remaining essences and sort of base of the Corona Extra without any of the fun, bright, citrusy, characteristically Mexican pop that I associate with the better brewed Mexican beers. So yeah, second last place. Estrella Jalisco, this one has a little bit more of an acceptable body compared to the Corona Familiar and Victoria, along with no sort of unpleasant aftertastes. Neither does the Corona Familiar, but again, that's about all I can say. The Estrella is just a very, very, I would say, all-around mediocre beer in terms of a shade of the Mexican citrusy brightness, the base minimum of sort of an acceptable lager body, not a whole lot of flavor on top of that, just it's fine. The Modelo Especial is, again, a pretty mediocre kind of just beer. There's not a whole lot going on to it. The only thing I will give it points for is the fact that it does taste fairly clean. It does taste kind of refreshing, where there's nothing that makes you think like, while drinking it. It's just a little lighter, a little thin, and there's not much in the way of flavor, but it does leave a reasonably clean aftertaste in the scheme of things. So as something that you could drink that you don't really have to think much about, it works perfectly fine. And I suppose maybe in that way, it's one of the reasons why it is as of right now, the best-selling beer in the United States. I do think that the Modelo Negro, or Modelo Black, is a little bit better. It's got, again, not much, but a tiny bit in terms of sort of darker beer sweetness to it. Still, it's got a very light body, which isn't ideal, but at least there's a little bit more of a note to the beer that I can pick out compared to this one here. So I've got to give it points for that. But aside from just a really minor, sort of vaguely sweet dark beer flavor, not much going on. Then we get to the Cheladas, the Naranja Picosa and the Especial. I'm personally leaning with the Especial because I just think that the tomato and lime and slight pepper flavor mixes a little bit better with just lager beer as I think about it. The Naranja Picosa, which is still just fun, you've got that kind of sugary orange juice flavor mixed in with the beer, but I don't know, as I said earlier, I do think that beer, at least in this category, should generally be more of a savory beverage. That sounds a little weird saying it's like savory. I think of savory as food, right? You don't think of like savory drinks, but a non-sweet drink. Aside from, obviously, we're not talking about lambics, we're not talking about certain types of high octane, German Dunkels, and there's a whole class of beer, obviously, that you do have sweetness in it. But if we're talking about the beers on this table, for example, and especially we're talking about like orange juice sugariness, I do think that tomato juice, which is not sweet, it does pair a little bit better than the sweetness you get from something like orange juice. And I like this one also has a little bit of like a warmth to it, a little pepperiness. So, but either way, I gotta give these beers points for the fact that they blend such disparate flavors together in a way that doesn't make you go, ah. And yes, you might disagree with me and you might say in terms of drinking these, I would put them down here maybe. I'd put the Modelo Especial, the Modelo Negro above it. So I'm just giving these points because of the inventiveness of it and the fact that they were able to, the Modelo brewery, they were able to pull it off, that you can actually blend these flavors together and it doesn't taste terrible. That just gets extra bonus points in my book. But getting to the top here, I've got Pacifico in number 2. This is sort of, in some ways I could almost describe it like the Estrella Jalisco or the Modelo Especial, where it is a classic Mexican lager that has a typical sort of beer flavor to it, but a nice balance of the body of a beer along with a bit of a sort of citrusy, bright note to it mixed together. It's very easy to drink. There's absolutely nothing off-putting about it. And it is something you don't really have to think about, like with the Modelo Especial, but just where there is a bit more in the way of, not crazy. There's a little bit more in the way of, feeling to the beer when you're drinking it, when it's in your palate, a little bit more citrusy brightness, and also it doesn't feel as thin as the Modelo Especial, while also still being sort of clean in the palate, which is nice. But then in first place, I really still have to give it to the Corona Extra. I know you might call me super basic for picking out Corona Extra as the best beer out of all of these, but I don't know. For me, the Corona Extra just encapsulates all of the aspects of Mexican beer as I think about it in the best sense possible, given that this is a global beer brand. So again, we're not talking about super artisanal Mexican beers, but I'm talking mass market Mexican beers. This encapsulates the best aspects of what I associate with mass market Mexican beer, which is it's a lager, it's easy to drink, it is light, but it's not thin, it is bright, it is citrusy, it has an acceptable body, and it is just perfect, along with a lime wedge, to drink during the day, and especially when it's hot and it's summertime and you just want to kick back with an ice cold Corona and take it all in. And I think what we're gonna do, let's drop a lime wedge down the neck. I don't know about you, but that tastes like summer to me, and you know what? That works. So anyway, that's my assessment. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you totally disagree with my assessment, please let me know in the comments. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. It really helps us make more content in the weeks and months going forward. Like the video if you haven't done that. Share it with your friends if you feel so inclined. And I'll see you next time.